Rights and responsibilities. So explaining the significance of those rights of the clients and their families, as well as their responsibilities. And this just builds off, the intake, the whole process, right? So you've explained your roles and responsibilities as providers, but then you're going to expand on what their roles are.
Right. So
parent participation would probably, I know we mentioned that earlier, but it would, fall under this
and notice
as well.
the privacy practices again kind of in here, right? So like they have the right to amend, they have the right to review, they have the right right to have access to their records, their child's records. And then other things in there may be like, what do I do if grandma comes and says I want it? Or, if uncle comes and says, hey, I need their records. Do I have to provide those, right? So those are questions in there. Who is allowed to access these?
And what information can you share?
What information can you share? Yeah, so this is important to know their rights and how that works. And again, it's also about your rights and what responsibilities you have and how you can disclose information outside of an emergency. Right now, if the ambulance comes and because there was an accident or an issue, that's a different story. There are uses and disclosures in there, and that again would be part of your notice of privacy practices. But in general, who can I give this information to, and how do I give this information out? It's really important that you understand your legal responsibilities and the family understands their legal responsibilities and their rights.
Yeah, well, and that brings us to the fifth one, emergency procedures and safety policies. The things that no one ever really wants to think about. But the hope is, right, you have all of these things in place and you never have to use them.
Yeah.
So
you're going to have to use them.
You will, yeah, unfortunately. But knowing what they are ahead of time, and that's one of the things that we've worked with so many companies over the years, and we have added new policies and procedures, and a lot of those are emergency and safety policies because of things that have happened in different agencies. And they reached out to us, hey, we need this policy. It's like as soon as you think that there are no other policies needed, that one pops out.
Yes,
no, we wouldn't have to do that. I almost feel like we should do one of those. I don't know if it would come across disrespectful on social media or not, but like one of those, like you don't know. What are those like funny like memes, right? Like, yeah, never mind. Well, I lost that idea as soon as it came out. Maybe we can cut that out of here.
I mean, I think it's fine. Like when I started selling the client handbook, I believe it was maybe 50 pages.
I know. My brain just like rebounded from that. So, how like you're like things you never thought you would say as a parent.
Right,
you see those where it's like, stop. I can't even think of one that's like appropriate to say, but like, like things that you think you're like, don't touch the dog with the stick, or I don't know, whatever. Like that one's really not all that crazy, but like you think of like crazy things that like you thought you would never say as a parent, and it comes out of your mouth and you're like, well, that's something I never thought I would say. Well, it's like the same thing for policies and procedures, and so it's like that's one I never thought I would have to handle.
One that we added that I never thought illegal activity in the home, right? Like duh, like if there's illegal activity in the home, we're not working there. But like you don't want your staff to become accessories to a crime, right? Okay. So like this seems like, yeah, I never thought I'd have to say that as a BCBA, but that's kind of one of those like that seems super obvious, but it's really important that you let the families know. And again, this is part of your risk assessment. Is this something that is going to be important or not? And is this can I keep my employees safe in this environment?
Well, and as you said in the beginning, of course this is geared towards in-home and clinic, but the risk assessment and the variability in the risk is going to be different in the home because you have less of control over what's happening in the home. And so even things like we're not childcare, and so that was one of the very first policies and procedures way back in the beginning years that we had to put in place, that no, I'm sorry. When we're providing in-home services, an adult has to be present in the home at all times. We're not childcare, and
Right.
we don't want to be liable for that. Or,
Right.
this is our staff in your home. What if they get a call from their school that their
Yeah.
child's sick and they have to leave to go
Or
take
there's an
care of
emergency.
or there's an emergency.
Yeah.
And so, like, looking at things like tornado warnings or earthquake drills or fire things, it's necessary to have those conversations. And that's part of the first point that we talked about, during the client intake and onboarding, doing the risk assessment, and then also looking at it during policies and procedures of, okay, if there's a fire in the home, what's the procedure, and needing to post that like on the family's refrigerator or something where all can see. If there is an emergency, if someone in the home falls ill or has I don't know, like falls down and becomes unconscious or whatever, like you have to call 911 and things like that. So there is a level of responsibility that is a little bit more. You have to think about these emergency procedures even more so in the in-home setting. But even in clinic, what is your all of those disaster drills, and
Fire and
you
evacuation,
need to
emergency
practice
response.
them, you need to post them,
Yep.
you need to you have to go through training, you have to
Active shooter.
yeah, I know.
All of these things,
Unfortunately, yeah, that's one that you also it needs to be looked at as well.
Yeah.
So, what are all the policies and procedures?
And then, like, if there is an incident in the home or at the clinic, what's next? So,
Right.
filling out the incident report, what happened, right? And the witnesses write down the information as soon as humanly possible so that we don't lose, people forget, story changes. We want to get that information as quickly as humanly possible. And then we want to follow up with a safety officer, ethics officer, and if you don't have those positions, I would highly recommend getting those positions in place, but at least going to their BCBA or the clinical director and figuring out what we're going to do next, especially if this is happened a couple of times, and like we want to prevent these things. We want to prevent workers' comp claims. We want to prevent people getting hurt at work. We want to prevent clients getting hurt at work. These are important things. And like if there is like a crisis intervention, right? And you do have to like put a child in a hold or something like that because they're going to run out in the street. Some funders require that you report that to them if something like that happens, and you have to call the ABA department, and so that's just something to be aware of. Like, and that should be part of that process. Who are we contacting, and when are we contacting them, and when do you have to? If you're in clinic and a child bites your child, who are we contacting? How do we contact? What when so all of these things need to be developed before. Again, go back to the last podcast. Before you start seeing clients, it's so important. It's just so important. Yeah.
It is. So, unfortunately for the emergency procedures and safety policies, it is important to put that disaster thinking hat on and think about all the bad things that could happen. And then once that's done, take a deep breath and do whatever you need to reset your nervous system to be able to come back from that. And so
just one more thing on that though, like just something that you probably want to get used to doing, or at least start doing, is failure mode analysis. It's a fairly good practice to get into. So you list out things that you do, and then ways that they could go terribly wrong. And then you try, this, I can't remember what podcast it was it cameras or HIP? I don't know anymore. But like the Swiss cheese model, you try to put things in place so that, if, this catches it, and if that doesn't catch it, then we have this thing that will try to prevent it, right? So you can put mechanisms, policies, trainings in place so that you can prevent these things from happening. So failure mode analysis is really good to get into. It's super boring, but it can be very helpful. So, yeah.
You say boring, I say activating.
There you go.